A 9-year-old girl walked 4 miles in the Arizona heat carrying nothing but a motorcycle key. When she reached the Iron Brotherhood clubhouse and told them she wanted to sell her dead father's Harley to save her dying mother, the club president's face went white. He recognized the bike model immediately. What he said next made grown men cry. And within an hour, 280 roaring engines were tearing down her street. What they did when they saw that Harley sitting in her driveway changed her life forever. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. The morning sun was already brutal when Savannah woke up. That thick, oppressive Arizona heat that settles over everything before 8 a.m. and doesn't let go until long after dark. But the heat wasn't what made her chest feel tight. It was the sound coming from her mother's bedroom, or rather, the lack of sound. Her mother's breathing had changed overnight. It was shallow now, raspy. Each breath seemed like it took everything she had just to pull it in. Savannah stood in the doorway, watching her mother's chest rise and fall with a struggle that made Savannah's own lungs ache in sympathy. Her mother tried to sit up, failed, tried again. Her arms shook with the effort, and she collapsed back onto the pillow, eyes squeezed shut in frustration and pain. She didn't even have the strength to get out of bed anymore. Savannah didn't say anything. What could she say? They've been fighting this battle for months. Her mother had been strong for so long, working double shifts even when she felt awful, smiling through the exhaustion, promising Savannah that everything would be okay. But things weren't okay. They hadn't been okay for a long time. Savannah walked slowly to the kitchen. The pile of papers on the table seemed to have grown overnight. Medical bills with red stamps across them. Final notices, collection letters, and there, right on top, the eviction notice. 14 days. That's all they had left. 14 days before they'd lose the only home Savannah had ever known. She touched the edge of the eviction notice, her small fingers tracing the bold letters. Her mother had tried to hide it under the other papers, but Savannah had found it 2 days ago. She hadn't said anything. What was the point? There was no money. There were no options left. They'd sold everything they could sell. Her mother's jewelry, the television, the nice furniture Savannah's grandmother had left them. All of it gone, fed into the endless hungry mouth of medical debt. But there was one thing left. Savannah turned and looked out the kitchen window. There, sitting in the driveway under a faded tarp, was her father's Harley Davidson, the last piece of him they had. The bike he'd loved more than anything except his family. The bike her mother couldn't bring herself to sell. Even when the bills started piling up, even when the food ran low, even when the eviction notice arrived, it was a beautiful machine. Savannah didn't know much about motorcycles, but she knew her father had spent every spare moment working on that bike, polishing the chrome until it gleamed, adjusting the engine until it purred like a contented cat. He'd sit out there for hours, and sometimes Savannah would bring him lemonade, and he'd lift her up onto the seat and tell her stories about the open road. That bike was sacred. It was memory made metal. It was the smell of her father's leather jacket and the sound of his laugh and the feeling of being safe in his arms. But her mother was dying. Savannah made a decision that morning that would bring 280 strangers to her doorstep. She walked to the small drawer where her mother kept important things, keys, documents, photographs, and there on a worn leather keychain was the key to her father's Harley. Savannah picked it up. The metal was cool and heavy in her palm, heavier than it should be for something so small. Or maybe that was just the weight of what it represented. The last connection, the final goodbye, the end of before and the desperate gamble on after. She closed her fingers around it tight. Her mother would be furious if she knew. Her mother would cry and say they'd find another way. But Savannah had heard her mother crying in the bathroom last night when she thought Savannah was asleep. She'd heard her mother on the phone with the hospital, begging for more time, promising to pay, her voice breaking with each word. There was no other way. There was no more time. Savannah was 9 years old, but she understood something that morning that most children never have to learn. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes sacrifice is the only choice left. Sometimes a little girl has to become the adult because the adult can't do it anymore. She slipped the key into her pocket and walked back to her mother's room. Her mother was asleep now or unconscious. Savannah wasn't sure which anymore. She leaned down and kissed her mother's forehead. It was burning hot. Savannah whispered, "I'll fix this, Mama. I promise." Then she turned and walked out the front door, heading toward the sound of distant motorcycle engines, clutching her father's key like a lifeline, with no idea that she was about to walk into the arms of men who would change everything. Savannah stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at the small house that held everything she knew. Her mother's labored breathing was the only sound cutting through the morning stillness. She needed to leave something, some explanation, some reassurance that she wasn't just running away. She found a scrap of paper and a pencil on the kitchen counter. Her handwriting was careful. The letters large and uneven. The way a child's writing is when they're trying their very best to be understood. "Mama, I went to get help. I'll be back soon. I love you more than the whole sky. Savannah." She drew a small heart at the bottom and placed the note on the pillow beside her mother's head. Then she walked out into the Arizona heat with nothing but her father's Harley key, wearing a faded purple t-shirt and jeans that were a little too short because she'd grown since last summer, and there was no money for new clothes. She had heard the motorcycles the night before, distant thunder rolling through the evening air. Her father used to talk about the sound of Harleys in a pack, how you could feel it in your chest before you heard it with your ears, how it was like a heartbeat, the heartbeat of the road, he'd said. And last night, lying in bed, listening to her mother's struggling breaths, Savannah had heard that heartbeat in the distance, and remembered something her father had said once. Something about brothers, something about family on the road, something about people who never left one of their own behind. She didn't have a plan exactly, just a hope, a desperate, fragile hope that whoever was making that sound might understand. Might help. Might see a little girl with her father's key and recognize that she was offering something sacred. So Savannah followed the sound. She walked down her street, past the neighbors who were just starting to wake up, past the corner store with the faded awning, past the church with the broken sign. She walked in the direction of that distant rumble, letting it pull her forward like a rope she couldn't see, but could feel wrapped around her heart. The Arizona sun climbed higher. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight. Sweat soaked through the back of her shirt. Her throat went dry. She hadn't thought to bring water, hadn't thought about much of anything except moving forward, following that sound, finding help. Her shoes were old sneakers, hand-me-downs from a cousin, and the sole on the left one was coming loose. It flapped with each step, a rhythmic slap against the hot sidewalk. Slap, step, slap, step. The sound became a metronome, marking her progress. Marking time, marking the distance between desperation and hope. She had no idea the men she was walking toward knew her father's name by heart. After the first mile, Savannah had to stop. There was a bus bench under a scraggly tree that provided about 6 in of shade. She sat down, her legs aching, her feet burning. She pulled the key from her pocket and stared at it. The leather keychain was worn smooth from her father's hands. How many times had he held this same key? How many rides had started with the turn of this small piece of metal? She thought about turning back, going home, crawling into bed next to her mother, and pretending everything was fine. But then she remembered the sound of her mother's breathing, the rattle in her chest. The way she couldn't even sit up anymore, and Savannah stood up and kept walking. The second mile was harder. Her legs felt heavy. Each step took conscious effort. The heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, making the world feel liquid and unstable. A car passed her, the driver glancing over with concern at the sight of a small girl walking alone in the heat. But they didn't stop. Nobody stopped. Savannah didn't expect them to. This wasn't their burden to carry. She counted her steps sometimes to distract herself from the pain in her feet. 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Sometimes she sang songs her father used to sing to her. Old country songs about the road and freedom and finding your way home. Her voice was small and thin against the vast Arizona sky, but it kept her company. It reminded her why she was doing this. By the third mile, the sound of motorcycles was getting louder, closer, more distinct. She could hear individual engines now, not just the collective rumble. Her heart started beating faster, though whether from hope or fear, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. Her shoes were covered in dust. Her face was flushed red from the heat. Her hair stuck to her forehead in sweaty strands, but her hand never let go of that key. Her fingers were cramped from holding it so tightly for so long. But she didn't loosen her grip. This key was her ticket, her bargaining chip, her last chance. If you've ever had to make an impossible choice to save someone you love, then you understand what Savannah felt in that moment. The weight of it, the fear that you're doing the wrong thing mixed with the certainty that you have to do something, the knowledge that once you take this step, there's no going back. Everything changes. Everything has to change because staying the same means losing what matters most. Savannah was about to walk into something she never expected. The motorcycle sounds were coming from a building up ahead. A low, sprawling structure with bikes parked out front. Lots of bikes, more bikes than Savannah had ever seen in one place. Chrome gleaming in the sunlight, leather seats, American flags, and men. Dozens of men in leather vests and worn jeans standing around talking, laughing, working on their machines. Savannah stopped at the edge of the property. Her courage, which had carried her 4 miles through the Arizona heat, suddenly faltered. These were big men, rough men. Men with long beards and tattoos and expressions that looked hard until you got close enough to see the lines around their eyes from years of squinting into the sun and wind. But she'd come this far. She'd walked 4 miles. She'd left her mother alone and dying. She couldn't turn back now. Savannah took a deep breath, wrapped her small fist tighter around her father's key, and walked toward the Iron Brotherhood Arizona Chapter Clubhouse. The Iron Brotherhood Arizona Chapter Clubhouse sat at the end of a long gravel drive, surrounded by more motorcycles than Savannah could count. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the presence of so much chrome and steel and raw power. Some of the bikes were being worked on, tools scattered on the ground beside them. Others gleamed in the sunlight, polished to mirror perfection, their owners standing nearby with rags in hand, making small adjustments that probably didn't need to be made, but gave them an excuse to be close to their machines. The men themselves looked exactly like what Savannah had expected, and nothing like it at the same time. They were massive, most of them. Broad shoulders straining against leather vests. Arms covered in tattoos that told stories Savannah couldn't read, but could feel the weight of. Long beards, some gray, some still dark bandanas and sunglasses, boots that had seen 1,000 miles of road. They looked dangerous. They looked like the kind of men her mother would have told her to stay away from. But Savannah didn't have the luxury of staying away. She stood at the edge of the property, frozen. Her feet had carried her 4 miles, but now they seemed rooted to the ground. Her courage, which had burned so bright when she left her mother's bedside, flickered like a candle in the wind. These men were laughing, talking loudly, their voices rough and deep. One of them was telling a story, his hands gesturing wildly, and the others were cracking up, the sound of their laughter rolling across the yard like thunder. Savannah's hand was still wrapped around her father's key. She could feel the grooves of it pressed into her palm. She thought about her mother, about the sound of her breathing, about the eviction notice, about having come all this way for nothing if she turned back now. She took one step forward, then another. Her worn shoes crunched on the gravel. The sound cut through everything. In an instant, every conversation stopped. Every laugh died mid-breath. Every head turned in perfect unison toward the small figure walking toward them, a 9-year-old girl, dusty and sweaty, her face flushed from the heat, her clothes worn, her shoes falling apart, walking into the heart of a biker clubhouse like she had every right to be there. The silence was absolute, complete. The kind of silence that feels heavy, that presses against your skin, that makes time seem to slow down and stretch out. Dozens of pairs of eyes fixed on Savannah. Some curious, some confused, some concerned. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. They just watched this little girl walk toward them with determination written across her small face. Then one man stepped forward. He was older than most of the others, his beard more gray than black, his face weathered by years of sun and wind and road. There was an authority in the way he moved, a quiet command that made it clear without words that this was the man in charge, the president of the chapter, the one the others looked to. He walked slowly toward Savannah, his expression a mixture of concern and confusion. When he got close enough, he crouched down to her eye level, his knees creaking slightly with the movement. His voice, when he spoke, was surprisingly gentle. "Sweetheart, you lost?" Savannah shook her head. Her throat felt tight. Her voice, when it came out, was smaller than she wanted it to be, trembling with exhaustion and fear and desperate hope. "No, sir. I want to sell my daddy's Harley." She swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I need money to help my mom. She's sick. She's real sick and I'm too small to bring the bike here, but it's at my house. It's a good bike. My daddy took real good care of it." The president's eyebrows rose. He glanced back at the other men, several of whom had stepped closer, forming a loose semicircle around the small girl. Their faces showed a mixture of emotions, sympathy, confusion. Respect for a kid brave enough to walk into their territory, asking for help. The president looked back at Savannah. His voice was careful now measured. "Where's your daddy, sweetheart? Why isn't he here?" Savannah's eyes dropped to the ground. "He died 2 years ago. It's just me and Mama now, and she can't. She can't work anymore. And the bills." Her voice broke. She stopped, took a breath, studied herself, 9 years old and already having to be so much braver than any child should have to be. The president was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that would change everything. "What's your daddy's name?" Savannah looked up at him. She said her father's full name clearly, proudly, the way children do when they're honoring someone they love. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The president's face went completely white. The color drained from his cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. His eyes went wide, then wider. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Behind him, there were gasps. Sharp intakes of breath. One man actually stumbled backward a step. Another's hand flew to his mouth. The silence that followed wasn't like the first silence when Savannah had arrived. That silence had been surprised, curious. This silence was shocked, heavy with recognition and disbelief and sudden, overwhelming emotion. This silence hurt. Men who looked like they'd never been scared of anything in their lives looked scared now. Not of danger, not of violence, of grief, of loss, of a ghost suddenly made real in the form of a small girl holding a motorcycle key. The president's hands were shaking. He pressed them against his knees to steady them. His voice, when he finally found it, was barely above a whisper. Horse-broken kid. He had to stop. Clear his throat. Try again. Kid, your daddy rode with us. The words hung in the air like smoke. Behind him, men were starting to murmur her father's name, saying it over and over like a prayer or a curse or both. Some of them had tears in their eyes. These hard men, these rough men, these men who looked like they'd seen everything the world had to offer and hadn't blinked were crying. We lost track of him. The president continued, his voice steadier now, but still thick with emotion, years ago. He just disappeared. We looked for him. God, we looked, but we never. He stopped, shook his head. We never knew he had a family. We never knew he had a little girl. Savannah's eyes were wide. You knew my daddy. Knew him. The president let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Sweetheart, your daddy was one of us. He was a brother. We rode together for years. His voice broke completely. He looked at the men behind him and something passed between them. An understanding, a decision made without words. What happened in the next 60 seconds would mobilize the entire Arizona chapter. The president stood up, his full height impressive, commanding. He turned to face the assembled men, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority and absolute grief and absolute determination. Boys, saddle up. The president's command hung in the air. But before anyone moved, before engines roared to life, there was a moment, a sacred, terrible moment where the past crashed into the present and left everyone standing in the wreckage trying to understand what it meant. The gasps had started the second Savannah said her father's name. But now they turned into something more. Murmurs, whispers, men turning to each other with expressions of disbelief and dawning recognition. One biker, a man with silver running through his black beard, put his hand over his heart like he'd been struck. Another closed his eyes and tilted his head back toward the sky, his lips moving in what might have been a prayer or might have been just her father's name said over and over. They were all saying it now, her father's name rippling through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water, the ring spreading outward, touching everyone. Some said it with wonder, some with grief, some with the kind of reverence you reserve for the dead who mattered, who shaped you, who left a hole when they left. I remember when he first prospected, one man said, his voice thick. Kid was scared as hell but wouldn't show it. Had more heart than sense. Remember that ride to Flagstaff? Another added, storm came out of nowhere, and he kept us all together. Nobody got left behind. That was him, always making sure nobody got left behind. He could fix anything, someone else offered. Engine trouble, electrical problems, didn't matter. Give him a wrench in an hour, he'd have you back on the road. The memories came flooding back. Each man adding a piece to the puzzle. Rebuilding a picture of Savannah's father that she'd only known as Daddy. They knew him as brother, as road captain, as the guy who always had your back, as the one who'd give you his last dollar if you needed it, as the man who could make you laugh when the road got hard and the nights got long. The president turned back to Savannah. His eyes were red-rimmed now, glistening with tears he was too proud to let fall, but couldn't quite hold back. He crouched down again, getting on her level. And when he spoke, his voice carried a weight of history that Savannah could feel, even if she couldn't fully understand it. Your daddy was one of us, little one of the best of us. We rode together for 5, maybe 6 years. He was there when I patched in. I was there when he earned his full colors. The president touched the patch on his own vest, the iron cross and wings that marked him as Iron Brotherhood. That means something. That means everything. It means your family for life. It means your brothers will die for you and you die for them. It means when you disappear, when you just vanish one day without a word, it tears a hole in everyone who knew you. He paused, collecting himself. We looked for him for months. We called every hospital, every jail, every chapter from here to California. Nothing. It was like he just dissolved into the air. Some of us thought maybe he got in trouble. Some thought maybe he wanted out and was too scared to say it. Some thought he stopped, couldn't say what some thought, but none of us, not one single man here, knew he had a family, knew he had a daughter. If we'd known. Savannah's eyes were welling up now, tears building and building until they spilled over and ran down her dusty cheeks. Her voice came out in a whisper. He died 2 years ago. The words landed like a physical blow. Men flinched. Some turned away. The one with the silver beard made a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. Another slammed his fist against his bike. The clang of metal on metal, sharp and angry and helpless. How? The president asked, though his voice suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Accident, Savannah said, her voice small. At his work, he was a mechanic at the shop on 7th Avenue. Something fell. They said it was quick. They said he didn't suffer. She recited the words like she'd heard them 1,000 times, like they'd been burned into her memory, but never really made sense. How could gone be quick? How could gone not hurt? The president closed his eyes. A single tear escaped and ran down into his beard. When he opened his eyes again, there was something fierce there, something determined. He left the life to take care of you and your mama. That's why he disappeared. He didn't abandon us. He chose you. He chose being a daddy over being a brother. And that his voice broke. That's the most honorable thing a man can do. Around them, men were openly crying now. These weren't the kind of men who cried easily. These were men who'd seen bar fights and road accidents and brothers lost to prison and worse. These were men who'd been taught their whole lives that tears were weakness. But they were crying now because grief isn't weakness. Love isn't weakness. And the realization that one of their own had been out there struggling, had died alone, had left behind a little girl who was now standing in their clubhouse trying to sell his bike to save her mother. That wasn't something you could face with a dry eye. What happened to your mama? The president asked gently. She got sick about a year after Daddy died. Cancer. She kept working as long as she could, but now she can't get out of bed. And the bills. Savannah's voice wavered. The bills just keep coming and we sold everything else. And the only thing left is Daddy's bike, and I know Mama didn't want to sell it because it's all we have left of him, but she's dying and I can't. The words tumbled out faster and faster until they dissolved into sobs. I can't lose her, too. I can't be alone. This was the moment everything changed. Not when Savannah arrived, not when she said her father's name, but right here, right now, when this little girl who'd walked 4 miles in the Arizona heat carrying nothing but a key and a prayer finally broke down and showed these hard men just how completely, utterly, desperately alone she was. The president pulled Savannah into his arms. This massive man with his weathered face and his gray beard and his leather vest held this tiny girl against his chest while she cried. And he looked over her head at his brothers and they all saw the same thing in his eyes, the same promise, the same oath. The president made a decision right there that would shake the entire neighborhood. He stood up, still holding Savannah's hand, and turned to face his men. His voice when he spoke was steady and strong and carried the kind of authority that comes from knowing without question that every man there would follow him into hell itself if he asked. Mount up. What happened next was something Savannah would remember for the rest of her life. Something she'd tell her own children about one day. Something that would be burned into her memory so deeply that even decades later, she'd be able to close her eyes and feel it all over again. The president's command had been simple, 2 words, mount up. But those 2 words set off a chain reaction that transformed the entire clubhouse from a place of grief and shock into something else entirely, something primal, something powerful, something that felt like justice taking physical form. The first engine roared to life, then another, then 3 more. Then suddenly, all at once, the air itself exploded with sound. 280 Harley-Davidson engines firing in rapid succession. Each one adding its voice to a chorus that wasn't just heard, but felt. Felt in your chest, felt in your bones, felt in the ground beneath your feet. The noise was overwhelming, glorious, terrifying in its magnitude. It wasn't just sound. It was power made audible. It was fury and loyalty and brotherhood condensed into pure vibration. The kind of sound that announces that something important is happening, that the world is about to shift, that everything is about to change. Savannah had never heard anything like it. Her father's single Harley had been loud, sure, but this was different. This was an army mobilizing. This was thunder bottled and unleashed. The sound waves hit her in physical pulses, making her hair whip back, making her clothes flutter against her body. She could feel it in her teeth, in her lungs, in her heart, which was suddenly pounding in rhythm with the engines. The president scooped Savannah up like she weighed nothing. His hands were gentle despite their size, careful despite their calluses. He lifted her onto the seat of his bike, a massive street glide with chrome that gleamed like liquid silver in the sunlight. The seat was still warm from the Arizona sun, the leather soft and worn smooth from thousands of miles. You ever been on a bike before? He asked, his voice barely audible over the rumbling engines. Savannah shook her head, her eyes wide. Just hold on to me, he said. And don't be scared. You're safer right now than you've ever been in your life. He climbed on in front of her and Savannah wrapped her small arms around his waist. The leather of his vest was warm and smelled like road dust and motor oil and something else she couldn't name. Something that reminded her of her father. Maybe all bikers smelled like this, like freedom and loyalty and miles traveled. The convoy began to form. It happened with a precision that spoke of years of riding together. Decades of knowing who rode where, who flanked who led and who followed. The president took point, Savannah sitting behind him. Then came the road captain, then the sergeant at arms. Then the rest fell into formation 2 by 2. A massive snake of chrome and steel and leather stretching back and back and back. From above, it would have looked like something out of a movie. From the ground, it felt like the earth itself was moving. The collective rumble of 280 Harleys idling was a physical presence. The air vibrated with it. The ground trembled. Dust rose from the gravel in small clouds. The metal on the bikes hummed and sang with the vibration. Then they started moving. The president's bike rolled forward first and the entire convoy followed like a single organism. They moved slowly at first. Carefully, Savannah's small hands gripping the president's vest tighter as they picked up speed. The wind started hitting her face, warm and dry and smelling of Arizona dust and gasoline and hot asphalt. The sound, God, the sound. With all 280 bikes moving together, the roar was apocalyptic. It echoed off buildings. It set off car alarms. It made windows rattle in their frames. Dogs barked. Birds took flight. The very air seemed to part before them as they rode. Savannah had told the president her address. He knew the neighborhood. It was only a few miles away, but those miles transformed as the convoy rolled through. People stopped what they were doing. Store owners came to their doors. Cars pulled over to the side of the road. Pedestrians on sidewalks froze mid-step, their phones coming out to record what they were seeing. Because you don't see something like this every day. You don't see nearly 300 bikers moving with purpose through residential streets, their engines synchronized, their formation tight, their faces set with determination. Some people looked scared. Most looked awed. All of them knew they were witnessing something significant, something that would be talked about for years. As they turned onto Savannah Street, neighbors came out of their houses. Elderly Mrs. Martinez from next door who'd lived there for 40 years. The Thompson family across the street with their 5 kids. Mr. Wallace, the veteran who always flew his flag. They all emerged onto their porches and lawns, their jaws dropping, their eyes widening as this massive convoy of Iron Brotherhood rolled slowly down their quiet suburban street. The ground shook, windows rattled. The sound was so loud that it drowned out everything else. No birds singing, no wind chimes, no normal neighborhood sounds, just the overwhelming, magnificent roar of 280 Harleys announcing that help had arrived, that family was coming home, that a little girl who'd walked 4 miles alone would never have to walk alone again. Savannah's small house looked even smaller now, dwarfed by this massive show of force and loyalty and brotherhood. The president slowed, the entire convoy slowing behind him, engines still rumbling, still filling the air with sound and power. But what they were about to find at Savannah's house would test every man there, would challenge them in ways that road accidents and bar fights and prison sentences never had. Because sitting in that driveway under a faded tarp was more than just a motorcycle. It was a memorial. It was a piece of a man they'd loved and lost. It was sacred ground. And every single one of them knew it the moment they saw it. If you believe family isn't just blood, it's loyalty. Then you understand what drove those men to Savannah's door. You understand that brotherhood isn't about leather vests or motorcycle clubs or shared roads. It's about showing up. It's about being there when someone needs you. Even if that someone is a stranger, even if that someone is a 9-year-old girl who just happens to be the daughter of a man you once called brother. Family isn't just the people who share your name. Family is the people who answer the call. The people who roll up 280 strong when one small voice asks for help. The engines began to quiet as the convoy came to a stop. One by one, the bikers killed their engines. And in the sudden relative silence, you could hear the sound of boots hitting pavement, the creak of leather, the jingle of keys and chains. 280 men dismounting, standing in formation, their eyes all focused on one thing. The tarp-covered Harley sitting in Savannah's driveway waiting to tell its story. Savannah Street had never seen anything like this. Had never heard anything like this. Had never felt the weight of this much presence. This much raw emotion concentrated in one place. Her quiet suburban neighborhood where the loudest sound was usually Mr. Wallace's lawn mower on Saturday mornings had been transformed into something else entirely, into hallowed ground, into a place where the past and present collided with such force that everyone who witnessed it knew they were standing at the edge of something profound. The president helped Savannah down from his bike. Her legs were shaky, whether from the ride or from exhaustion or from the overwhelming magnitude of what was happening. She couldn't tell, maybe all three. He kept his hand on her shoulder, steady and reassuring as they walked toward her driveway. The tarp was sun-faded, a green that had once been vibrant, but now looked tired, worn, like it had been sitting there protecting something precious for so long that it had started to give up. The shape underneath was unmistakable. The curve of the fuel tank, the angle of the handlebars, the long, low profile of a Harley-Davidson that had been built for the road and was now trapped, grounded, waiting. The president moved toward it slowly, his boots scraped against the concrete driveway, each step deliberate, careful, like he was approaching a grave, which in a way he was. Behind him, the other bikers had formed a loose semicircle, giving him space, but staying close. Their faces were solemn, reverent. These men understood what they were looking at. They understood that this wasn't just metal and chrome and rubber. This was legacy. This was memory. This was a brother frozen in time. He reached out and took hold of the tarp. His hands hesitated for just a moment, hovering over the fabric like he was afraid of what he might find underneath. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that large, he pulled the tarp back. The Harley emerged from beneath its covering like a resurrection. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. The chrome was dulled by time and neglect, covered in a fine layer of Arizona dust. The leather seat was cracked in places, dried out from sitting and used. The paint on the fuel tank, once glossy black, had lost some of its shine. But underneath all of that, underneath the evidence of 2 years of stillness, you could see what this bike had been. What it still was, it was a street glide. The same model the president rode. The same model half the men there rode. But it wasn't just any street glide. The president knew this bike. He'd ridden alongside it for years. He'd watched his brother polish that exact fuel tank. He'd seen him adjust those exact mirrors. He'd heard this specific engine roar to life 1,000 times. His hand reached out and touched the seat. His fingers tracing the crack in the leather. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the moment, every man there heard him clearly. It's his. I'd know this bike anywhere. A ripple went through the crowd. Men stepping closer, craning to see. Some of them remembered the bike, too. Others were just drawn by the weight of the moment, by the visible emotion on their president's face. One biker, a man with a long gray ponytail and tear tracks already staining his weathered cheeks, reached out and touched the handlebar like it was a holy relic. I remember when he bought this, someone said softly. Saved for 2 years. Worked double shifts at 3 different shops. When he finally had enough, we all rode with him to the dealership, made a whole day of it. He loved this bike more than anything, another added. His voice caught. Except his family, I guess. Except his little girl. The president straightened up. He pulled off his sunglasses, and his eyes were red and raw. He looked at Savannah, really looked at her, seeing past the dusty clothes and the worn shoes, and the small frame to the courage underneath, to the fierce love that had driven her 4 miles in the heat, to the daughter of a man he'd once sworn to protect. Standing there offering up the last piece of her father because she had nothing else left to give. He reached into his vest and pulled out his wallet, counted out bills, more bills than Savannah had ever seen in one place. He knelt down and pressed them into her hands, folding her small fingers around the money. "This is 3 times what that bike is worth on the market," he said. "We're not taking advantage of family and your family now. You understand? Your family." Savannah stared at the money in her hands. It was enough. More than enough. Enough to pay the overdue bills. Enough to buy her mother's medicine. Enough to keep the house. Enough to breathe, to survive, to have a chance. "Thank you," she whispered. Tears were streaming down her face. "Thank you so much. You can take the bike now. It's yours." The president smiled, but it was a sad smile. A smile that held more weight than a man his age should have to carry. He glanced back at his brothers and something passed between them. A silent conversation, a unanimous decision made without a single word spoken. "We're not taking the bike, sweetheart." Savannah blinked, confused. But I sold it to you." The money is yours. The bike stays here." He stood up, addressing the men behind him now. "Boys, this Harley is coming home back to the clubhouse, but not because we bought it, because we're restoring it. Every scratch buffed out, every crack repaired, new chrome, new paint, everything brought back to exactly how it was when our brother rode it. And then it's going on display in the clubhouse with his name above it. Honoring a man who gave up the road to be a father. Honoring a brother we never got to say goodbye to." The men nodded. Some said, "Amen." Others just stood there with tears in their eyes, understanding the significance of what was being offered. This wasn't about ownership. This wasn't about buying a bike. This was about preservation, about memory, about making sure that Savannah's father, a man who had disappeared from their lives to care for his family, would never be forgotten. "But it's your bike," the president continued, turning back to Savannah. "It always will be. When you're older, when you're ready, if you want to ride it, it's yours to ride. If you want to keep it in the clubhouse as a memorial, we'll keep it there forever. It's your choice, your legacy, your father's gift to you. We're just taking care of it until you're ready to decide what it means to you." Savannah couldn't speak. Couldn't find words for what she was feeling. Gratitude and grief and relief and disbelief all tangled together in her chest until she couldn't breathe. She just nodded over and over, tears streaming down her face. The bikers began to move then, organizing without needing to be told. Someone went to get a trailer from one of the support vehicles. Others began carefully examining the bike, talking in low voices about what would need to be done. New gaskets, oil change, brake fluid flush, tire replacement, chrome polish, leather treatment, paint restoration. They spoke with the reverence of craftsmen approaching sacred work. The president kept his hand on Savannah's shoulder. "Your daddy was a good man, the best of us, and we failed him by losing track of him, by not being there when he needed us. But we're here now. We're here for you and your mama and we're not going anywhere." But the story was about to take a turn nobody saw coming. Because at that exact moment inside the house, something was happening. Something that would transform this from a story of restoration and brotherhood into something far more urgent. Something that would test every man standing in that driveway in ways they couldn't possibly anticipate. Savannah's mother had woken up and she couldn't breathe at all anymore. The bikers had left that afternoon with promises and phone numbers and the assurance that someone would check on them tomorrow. They'd loaded the Harley onto a trailer with the kind of care usually reserved for priceless artifacts. They'd rumbled away down the street, leaving behind an envelope of additional cash slipped under Savannah's door when she wasn't looking, and the strange echoing silence that comes after something momentous has ended. Savannah had gone inside with enough money to save them. She'd stood in her mother's doorway, watching her sleep, clutching those bills in her hand like they were made of hope itself. Her mother's breathing was still shallow, still labored, but Savannah told herself it would be okay now. They could afford the medicine. They could pay the doctors. Everything was going to be okay. That was the afternoon. The night told a different story. Savannah woke to a sound that turned her blood to ice. A gasping sound. A choking sound, the sound of someone desperately trying to pull air into lungs that wouldn't cooperate. She bolted out of bed, her heart already racing, her hands already shaking, some primal part of her brain already knowing what she was going to find. Her mother was on the floor beside her bed. She tried to get up, maybe to use the bathroom, maybe to get water, and her legs had given out. Now she lay on the worn carpet, her chest heaving, her lips tinged with blue, her eyes wide with panic and the terrible understanding that this was bad. This was really, really bad. Mama! Savannah's scream tore out of her throat, raw and terrified. She dropped to her knees beside her mother, her hands hovering uselessly, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to fix this. Mama, please, please breathe. Please. Her mother's hand reached out, found Savannah's squeezed with what little strength she had left. She tried to speak, but all that came out was a rasping wheeze. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow movements that looked painful. That looked wrong. That looked like dying. Savannah's mind went blank with terror. Call 911. She needed to call 911, but the phone was in the kitchen and she couldn't leave her mother. She couldn't. What if she stopped breathing while Savannah was gone? What if those were the last moments and Savannah wasn't there? She was 9 years old and she was watching her mother die and she didn't know what to do. Then something clicked in her brain. The bikers, the president had given her his phone number, had told her to call anytime, day or night, for anything. But his number was written on a piece of paper in the kitchen and Savannah couldn't leave and she didn't have time and she ran, burst through the front door into the night. Her bare feet hitting the porch, her lungs pulling in air to scream for help, to wake the neighbors, to do something, anything. And that's when she saw them. 2 motorcycles parked at the end of her street under the street light. 2 men in leather vests leaning against their bikes, talking quietly. They'd been there all along, watching, waiting, making sure the daughter of their brother was safe through the night. Help! Savannah's scream cut through the darkness like a knife. Please, my mom. The transformation was instantaneous. Both men went from relaxed to full alert in a heartbeat. Engines roared to life. Bikes shot forward, covering the distance to Savannah's house in seconds. They didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. One of them, a younger biker with tribal tattoos running up his arms, was already on his phone before his boots hit the ground. This is Reaper. We need the president and everyone close. Now. Savannah's mother is in respiratory distress. The other biker, older with a scar running through his eyebrow, ran past Savannah into the house. She followed him, her legs barely able to keep up. He found Savannah's mother on the floor and dropped to his knees beside her, his hands already moving, checking her pulse, lifting her chin to open her airway. His training from years as a combat medic in another life taking over. She's barely getting oxygen, he called out. We need to move her now. Reaper was already dialing again. 911, yeah, we have a critical respiratory emergency. He gave the address, his voice calm and efficient despite the situation. Female, late 30s, cancer patient, severe breathing difficulty. Cyanotic. We're not waiting for you. We're transporting to Mesa General ourselves. Have an ER team ready. He hung up and looked at the other biker. Hawk, we good to move her? Hawk nodded. We don't have a choice. She's got minutes, not hours. They lifted Savannah's mother with practiced efficiency. One at her shoulders, one at her legs, moving as a unit. Savannah's mother was barely conscious now, her eyes rolling back, her breathing reduced to almost nothing. They carried her through the house, through the front door, down the porch steps. A truck had materialized. Savannah hadn't even heard it arrive, but there it was, a massive pickup with the back seat already cleared. Two more bikers had appeared out of nowhere, one holding the door open, the other spreading blankets across the seat. They laid Savannah's mother down as gently as possible. Hawk climbed in beside her, his fingers on her pulse, his other hand supporting her head. "Reaper, you drive fast but smooth. Savannah, get in front." Savannah scrambled into the passenger seat, her whole body shaking. Reaper slid behind the wheel and the engine roared to life. Behind them, the two motorcycles fired up, flanking the truck. "We're not waiting for an ambulance," Reaper said, his hand steady on the wheel. "Mesa General is 12 minutes away. We can do it in 7. He pulled out, tires squealing slightly, and suddenly they were flying through the dark Arizona streets. The two motorcycles stayed close, one in front, one behind, their lights cutting through the darkness. The biker in front was running interference. His hand signals warning the truck of turns ahead. The one behind was watching their six, making sure nothing slowed them down. In the back seat, Hawk was talking, his voice low and steady. "Stay with me. You hear me? Stay with me. Your girl needs you. Your girl walked 4 miles today to save you. You don't get to quit on her now. Breathe. Come on. Breathe." Savannah twisted in her seat, watching her mother's chest barely moving, watching Hawk's hands working, watching the street lights flash by faster and faster as Reaper pushed the truck harder. Red lights turned into suggestions. Stop signs became yield signs. The normal rules of the road dissolved in the face of life and death racing against the clock. Savannah's phone, clutched forgotten in her hand, began to buzz, then buzz again, then explode with notifications. The entire chapter was mobilizing. Word had spread through whatever network bikers used, that invisible web of brotherhood that connected them all. Members who'd gone home were turning around. Members who'd been asleep were throwing on clothes and grabbing keys. Members scattered across the city were converging on Mesa General Hospital because one of their own was in trouble because the daughter of their lost brother needed them. Because this was what family meant. This was what the patch on their vest stood for. Not just riding together on sunny days, but showing up in the darkness when everything was falling apart. Reaper blew through an intersection, horn blaring. A car screeched to a stop. The driver's angry honk dying when they saw what was coming. A massive truck with its hazards flashing, flanked by motorcycles, moving with such purpose and speed that anyone with sense got out of the way. 6 minutes, 5 minutes, 4. "Almost there," Reaper said, his voice tight. "Hold on." In the back, Hawk was still talking, still coaching, still refusing to let Savannah's mother slip away. "That's it. Small breaths. Just keep going. We're almost there. They're going to fix you up. You're going to be okay." But Savannah could see his face in the rearview mirror. Could see the tension there. The fear he was trying to hide. Could see that he wasn't sure she was going to make it. 3 minutes. 2. The hospital came into view. Lit up like a beacon. Reaper aimed straight for the emergency room entrance. Before they even stopped, the ER doors burst open and a team poured out. Nurses, doctors, a gurney. They'd been ready. They'd been waiting. But they hadn't been ready for what else was coming. The hospital staff had never seen anything like what rolled up to their entrance that night. Not just the truck and its desperate cargo. Not just the motorcycles flanking it like an honor guard, but what came after. What was already arriving, what was going to fill their parking lot and their waiting room and transform their entire ER into something that looked more like a fortress than a hospital. The Iron Brotherhood was coming, all of them. And they weren't leaving until one of their own was safe. The emergency room staff moved with practiced efficiency, pulling Savannah's mother from the truck, transferring her to the gurney, already assessing, already working. An oxygen mask went over her face. 4 lines were being prepped. A doctor was barking orders about intubation and blood gases and ICU prep. They moved as one organism. This team of medical professionals who'd seen 1,000 emergencies and knew exactly what to do. But even as they worked, even as they rushed Savannah's mother through those automatic doors, they couldn't help but notice what was happening in their parking lot. The rumble started low, distant, then closer, then everywhere. Motorcycles poured into the hospital parking lot like a flood. 10 bikes, 20, 50, 100. They kept coming, their headlights cutting through the darkness, their engines creating a wall of sound that made the hospital windows vibrate. They filled every available space, then created their own spaces, lining up in formation, backing in with military precision. 280 Iron Brotherhood members descended on Mesa General Hospital that night, and the night shift security guard took one look at what was rolling in and decided his pay grade didn't cover whatever this was about to be. He called for backup, then called for more backup, then decided to just let it happen because stopping it wasn't an option. The bikers dismounted in waves. They didn't rush, didn't run. They moved with purpose, but also with respect, understanding that this was a hospital, that there were sick people here, that chaos would help no one. But they came, all of them, dropping whatever they were doing, leaving dinners half-eaten and beds still warm because the call had gone out and you didn't ignore that call. Not when family needed you. They filed into the emergency room waiting area, and the transformation was immediate and surreal. The small waiting room with its plastic chairs and outdated magazines and fluorescent lighting suddenly looked like the clubhouse of a motorcycle club. Leather vests everywhere. Beards and tattoos and bandanas. Boots that had walked 1,000,000 miles. Hands that had built and fixed and fought and protected. The other people in the waiting room there for their own emergencies, their own crises, pressed themselves back against the walls, eyes wide, uncertain whether to be terrified or fascinated. A young couple with their sick toddler clutched their child closer. An elderly man with a broken arm stared openly. A woman who'd been crying about something stopped mid-sob, her mouth hanging open. The night nurse at the intake desk looked up from her computer and went pale. She reached for the phone, probably to call security, but the president stepped forward, his hands up in a peaceful gesture. His voice was calm, respectful, but carried absolute authority. "Ma'am, we're not here to cause trouble. We're here for the woman who just came in. Her name is," he gave Savannah's mother's name. "She's the mother of this little girl." He gestured to Savannah, who stood beside him, her hand gripped tightly in his. "We're her family. We're staying until she's okay. We'll be quiet. We'll be respectful, but we're not leaving." The nurse looked at this massive biker, then at the 279 bikers behind him, then at the small girl with tear-streaked cheeks and terrified eyes. Something in her face softened. She nodded slowly. "ICU waiting room is on the 3rd floor. You can't all fit up there. Then we'll rotate." The president said simply, "Some up there, some down here. We'll figure it out." And they did. With the kind of organization that comes from years of riding together, of coordinating runs and rallies and events, they established a system within minutes. 20 men upstairs in the ICU waiting room. 20 more in the main ER waiting area, the rest outside, smoking, talking quietly, keeping watch. Every hour, they'd rotate. Nobody got too tired. Nobody was left alone. The rotation ensured someone was always fresh, always alert, always there. Savannah was never alone for a single second. She sat in a plastic chair in the ICU waiting room, surrounded by giants in leather who took turns sitting beside her. One would bring her water. Another would get her crackers from the vending machine, even though she said she wasn't hungry. A third would just sit with his arm around her shoulders, not saying anything, just being there, being solid and real and proof that she wasn't facing this alone. The president went to the billing office, just walked in at 2 o'clock in the morning and found whoever was on duty handling finances. He placed a credit card on the desk. The woman behind the desk, middle-aged with tired eyes, and the weary expression of someone who spent all day fighting with insurance companies, looked at him skeptically. "I'm paying for everything," he said. "All of it. Every test, every medication, every day in the hospital, every single bill. I don't care what it costs." "Sir. I can't even tell you what the final cost will be until." "I don't care," he repeated. "Run the card. If there's a limit issue, I have more cards. We have more cards." He gestured vaguely toward the waiting room full of bikers. "Between all of us, we'll cover it. She doesn't pay a penny. Her daughter doesn't pay a penny. Whatever isn't covered by insurance, we cover. Understood?" The woman blinked at him. In 20 years of working hospital billing, she'd never seen anything like this. Who are you people?" The president's face softened. "We're her family. Her husband rode with us. He died and we didn't know. Didn't know he had a wife. Didn't know he had a daughter. Didn't know they needed us. But we know now. And he'd have done the same for us. Any of us. Without question. Without hesitation. This is what he'd want. This is what brotherhood means." The billing clerk's eyes filled with tears. She took the card with shaking hands and started processing paperwork that would ultimately run into 6 figures. Didn't matter. The brotherhood paid it all. Back in the ICU waiting room, Savannah had fallen asleep against Hawk's shoulder, exhausted from fear and adrenaline crash. He sat perfectly still, afraid to move and wake her, his tattooed arm around this small girl who'd become everyone's daughter in the span of a single day. Other bikers sat nearby, some dozing, some reading, some just staring at nothing, processing everything that had happened. The nurses came out periodically with updates. Each time, every biker in that waiting room would stand. A wall of leather and anticipation and barely controlled fear. The nurses, who'd been intimidated at first by all these rough-looking men, started to see something else. Started to see the tears that some of them tried to hide, started to see the gentle way they treated Savannah. Started to see the fierce loyalty and the desperate hope and the raw honest love. One nurse, a young woman barely out of nursing school, came out after midnight with an update. Savannah's mother was stable, on a ventilator, in critical condition, but alive, fighting. The relief that went through that waiting room was physical. Grown men collapsed back into chairs. Some put their faces in their hands. Some looked up at the ceiling like they were thanking God. One biker actually broke down sobbing and 2 of his brothers just held him. No judgment, no shame because they all felt the same way. The young nurse stood there watching all of this, and her voice trembled when she spoke. "You guys really love her, don't you? Her and her daughter." The president looked at her with those tired, red-rimmed eyes. "Her husband was our brother, and you don't abandon family ever." "He must have been an amazing man," the nurse said softly, "to inspire this kind of loyalty." "He was," the president replied, "and we never got to say goodbye, but we're here now for his girls, for as long as they need us." The nurse smiled, wiped at her own eyes, and went back through the ICU doors. She told the other nurses what she'd seen. Word spread through the hospital. The intimidating bikers in the waiting room became the devoted family keeping vigil. The overnight staff started bringing them coffee without being asked. Security stopped hovering nervously and started nodding respectfully when they passed. Even the doctors, initially wary, began to see these men as allies rather than threats. Savannah's mother survived that night. And the next day and the day after that, slowly, gradually, she improved. The ventilator came out. She could breathe on her own again with oxygen support. Her color returned, her eyes opened, and the first thing she saw was Savannah sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, and behind Savannah, visible through the ICU window, a rotating guard of bikers who'd been there every minute of every day. She didn't understand, couldn't understand. But Savannah would explain it all later, would tell her about the walk, about the key, about the men who'd known her daddy, about the family they'd gained. But the brotherhood wasn't done yet. Because saving Savannah's mother was just the beginning. Because keeping them alive was only the first step. What came next would prove that this wasn't just a momentary kindness. Wasn't just an emotional reaction to finding their lost brother's family. What came next would prove that when the Iron Brotherhood said you were family, they meant it forever. Savannah's mother came home 3 weeks later, still weak, but breathing on her own, still tired, but alive. And when she walked through her front door, supported by Savannah on one side and Hawk on the other, she stopped dead in her tracks. The house was different. The pile of bills that had lived on the kitchen table for months was gone. In its place sat a simple note, all paid. Don't worry about money. Just heal. The eviction notice had vanished. The crushing weight of debt that had pressed down on them for so long had simply disappeared, lifted by calloused hands and open wallets, and a brotherhood that didn't understand the word impossible when it came to taking care of their own. The refrigerator, which had been mostly empty the day Savannah walked to the clubhouse, was now packed full. Fresh vegetables, milk, eggs, bread, real food, healthy food, the kind of groceries they hadn't been able to afford in months. And it didn't stop. Every few days, someone would show up at the door. Sometimes Reaper with his quiet smile and bags from the store. Sometimes a biker named Crusher who always included ice cream for Savannah. Sometimes women, the wives and girlfriends of club members who'd bring casseroles and hugs and understanding that only other women could provide. The rent was paid, not just for that month, but for the next 6 months. The utilities that had been threatening disconnection were current, caught up, prepaid. The medical bills that should have bankrupted them had been absorbed completely, paid in full by men who rode Harleys and wore leather and looked like trouble, but acted like angels. Savannah came home from school one afternoon to find boxes on her bed. New clothes, actual new clothes that fit and weren't hand-me-downs. A backpack, sturdy and bright, with pockets and zippers, and none of the tears her old one had collected. School supplies, notebooks, pencils, crayons, everything a kid could need, and more. She sat on her bed surrounded by all of it and cried. But they were different tears now. Not tears of desperation or fear, but tears of relief and gratitude and the overwhelming feeling of being seen, being cared for, being valued. The president visited often. He'd sit at their kitchen table drinking coffee Savannah's mother made, talking about her husband, filling in the gaps, telling stories about rides they'd taken and trouble they'd gotten into. And the man Savannah had known as Daddy, but they'd known as brother. He made Savannah's father real again in a way that photographs couldn't. Made him three-dimensional. Made him live in the space between memory and present. One afternoon, he sat Savannah down, her mother beside her on the couch, both of them wondering what was coming. He pulled out an envelope thick with papers, official-looking documents with seals and signatures. "We've established a scholarship fund," he said simply, "for Savannah. Full ride. Whatever school she wants to go to, wherever she wants to study, however long it takes, undergraduate, graduate, medical school, if that's what she wants, it's all covered." Savannah's mother's hand flew to her mouth. Fresh tears. There were always tears now, but the good kind. The kind that came from joy rather than despair. "You can't. That's too much. You've already done so much." The president shook his head firmly. "It's not too much. It's what her father would have wanted, would have demanded. He gave up everything, gave up the road, gave up the brotherhood to make sure she had a future. We're just making sure his sacrifice meant something. Making sure she gets every opportunity he worked so hard to give her." "You're not alone anymore," he continued, looking at both of them now, his voice carrying the weight of a promise that would never be broken. "Your family, that's not just words. That's a lifetime commitment. We're here for school pickups when you can't make it. We're here for broken water heaters and car troubles and homework help. We're here for birthdays and graduations and every important moment. We're here for the boring Tuesday afternoons and the emergency 3 a.m. phone calls. We're here, period." Savannah's mother couldn't speak. Could only nod and cry and reach out to take this man's scarred, weathered hand in both of hers, squeezing it like a lifeline. But there was something else, something the president had been waiting to show them until Savannah's mother was strong enough to make the trip. "There's one more thing," he said. "Something we need you to see, both of you, when you're ready." 2 days later, they pulled up to the clubhouse. Savannah's mother was still weak, still needing to rest frequently, but she'd insisted. They walked inside, Savannah holding her mother's hand, both of them nervous and curious and uncertain what they were about to see. And then they saw it. The Harley sat in the center of the main room, raised on a platform, spotlighted like the work of art it had become. The chrome gleamed with a brilliance that caught and threw light in every direction. The paint was flawless, deep black with subtle metallic flakes that made it shimmer. The leather seat had been completely restored, soft and supple and perfect. Every bolt had been replaced or polished. Every surface shined. It looked better than new. It looked like resurrection. But it was what hung above the bike that broke them both. A wooden plaque, hand-carved, stained dark and beautiful. Savannah's father's name in bold letters. Below it, his years of life, too few, too short. Below that, simple words, brother, rider, father, hero. Around the bike, mounted on the walls were photographs. Her father young and laughing on his first ride. Her father with his arm around the president. Both of them covered in road dust and grinning. Her father working on this exact bike, wrench in hand, concentration on his face. Her father wearing his colors, his vest, his patch, looking proud and strong and alive. A memorial, a shrine, a promise kept. Savannah's mother collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The sound that came out of her was everything she'd been holding in for 2 years. All the grief, all the loss, all the lonely nights and impossible days and moments when she thought she couldn't go on. It poured out of her in waves while bikers who'd never met her stood silently, respectfully, letting her grieve, letting her heal. Savannah stood beside her, hand on her mother's shoulder, staring at her father's bike, at his name, at proof that he'd mattered, that he'd been loved, that he'd been more than just the man who'd tucked her in at night. He'd been a brother to men who would cross the state to protect his daughter. He'd been important. He'd been remembered. But Savannah had one more moment that would break every man there. 3 months passed. Summer turned to fall. Savannah's mother grew stronger each day. The color returning to her cheeks, the light returning to her eyes. She started working again, part-time at first, with Brotherhood members offering to drive Savannah to school on days when her mother had early shifts. Life found a rhythm, a new normal, one built on the foundation of brotherhood and loyalty and the kind of love that doesn't require blood relation to be real. Savannah came to the clubhouse on a Saturday afternoon, her mother beside her. It had become a regular thing, these visits, sometimes for cookouts where the bikers would grill burgers and Savannah would run around with the other kids, children of members who'd become her friends, sometimes just to sit and listen to stories about her father, collecting memories like precious stones, building a picture of who he'd been beyond the daddy she'd known. But today was different. Savannah had something with her, something she'd been holding on to, something she'd been thinking about for weeks. Something that felt right in a way she couldn't quite explain, but knew in her bones was true. She walked through the clubhouse door, past the pool table where several members were playing, past the bar where Reaper was pouring drinks, past the photos and the memorabilia and the evidence of decades of brotherhood. She walked straight to where her father's Harley sat on its platform, gleaming under the spotlight, beautiful and sacred and permanent. The president was there, as if he'd been waiting. Maybe he had been. He had a way of knowing when important moments were coming, an instinct built from years of leading men who lived by feeling and loyalty rather than schedules and plans. Savannah stopped in front of him. She was taller now than she'd been that desperate morning when she'd walked 4 miles in the heat. Her face had filled out from regular meals and the absence of constant stress. Her eyes, while still carrying the shadow of everything she'd been through, also held something new. Confidence, security, the knowledge that she wasn't alone. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key. The same key she'd clutched for 4 miles. The same key she'd offered with trembling hands to strangers who became family. The same key that had started everything. It sat in her palm, worn and familiar. The leather keychain soft from years of her father's touch and months of Savannah's carrying it like a talisman. The clubhouse went quiet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Pool cues were set down. Everyone understood without words that something significant was happening. Savannah held the key up, offering it to the president. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but steady, clear, certain. It belongs here. The president stared at the key, his hands scarred from years of working on bikes and living hard and fighting when necessary, started to shake. He looked at Savannah, this small girl who'd walked into his life and changed everything. Who'd brought back a brother he thought he'd lost, who'd reminded all of them what the patch on their vest really meant. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's your daddy's key. That's yours." Savannah shook her head. "The bike belongs here. You restored it. You honored him. You've protected us. This key should be with people who knew him, who loved him, who remember him the way he was before. He was just my daddy." She pressed it into his hand, closing his fingers around it. The president looked down at the key in his palm, and tears started streaming down his face, disappearing into his gray beard. Around the clubhouse, grown men were wiping their eyes. Some weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The president pulled a chain from around his neck. A simple chain that held his road name medallion and a St. Christopher medal his mother had given him 40 years ago. He threaded the keychain onto it with hands that wouldn't quite steady, then lowered the chain back over his head. The key settled against his chest, right over his heart, next to the other things he never took off. "I'll never take it off," he whispered. "You understand? Never. This stays with me until the day I die, and then it gets buried with me." Savannah nodded, tears now streaming down her own face. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around the president's waist, this massive man who'd become a grandfather and protector and the embodiment of her father's legacy. He held her tight, one hand on the back of her head, the other clutching that key against his chest. "My dad would be proud you're my family now," Savannah said into his vest. The president's voice broke completely. "He's watching, sweetheart. And he knows. He knows we found you. He knows we're keeping you safe. He knows his little girl is never going to walk alone again." The key that started a 4-mile walk ended up around the neck of a man who would protect Savannah for life. That piece of metal that had once been just a tool to start an engine had become something else entirely. A symbol, a promise, a connection between past and present, between a father who'd loved his daughter enough to leave his brothers and brothers who loved their fallen member enough to care for his daughter forever. Around them, the clubhouse felt sacred, holy in the way that places become when something true happens inside them. When love is witnessed and honored and made permanent. But Savannah had one more thing to say. Years have passed since that desperate morning when a 9-year-old girl walked 4 miles in the Arizona heat, carrying nothing but hope and a motorcycle key. Time has a way of transforming crisis into story, tragedy into triumph, strangers into family. Savannah is 16 now. She stands taller, her eyes bright with the confidence that comes from knowing you're loved and protected and valued. She's on the honor roll at school. She's thinking about colleges, about maybe becoming a doctor, about following in the footsteps of the people who saved her mother's life. The scholarship fund sits waiting, ready to make whatever dream she chooses possible. Her future, which once looked so uncertain, so impossibly dark, now stretches out before her, full of opportunity and promise. Her mother is healthy, truly healthy. The cancer is in remission, pushed back by treatments they could afford because men in leather vests decided that medical bills were just numbers and family was everything. She works full-time now at a job she loves, surrounded by co-workers who've heard the story and can barely believe it's true. She smiles again, laughs again, lives again in a way she thought she never would after her husband died. And they're never alone. Not for a single day, not for a single moment when it matters. Savannah has 280 uncles now. 280 protectors who show up for school plays and parent-teacher conferences and birthday parties, who teach her how to change oil and fix flat tires and stand up for herself, who take her mother to doctor's appointments and help with grocery shopping and fix things around the house before they're even asked, who've become as permanent and essential as air itself. Every year on the anniversary of the day Savannah walked into the clubhouse, the Iron Brotherhood Arizona chapter holds a memorial ride in her father's honor. 280 Harleys line up at dawn, engines rumbling to life, chrome gleaming in the early morning sun. Savannah and her mother ride in the president's truck at the front of the convoy, leading this massive procession through the streets where Savannah once walked alone. They ride to Savannah's house first where it all began. They circle the block slowly, engines echoing off the houses, reminding the neighborhood of the day everything changed. Then they ride through the city, drawing stares and smiles and waves from people who've heard the story. They end at the clubhouse where Savannah's father's Harley still sits on its platform, still gleaming, still perfect, still watching over them all. And every year, Savannah places flowers next to the bike. Fresh flowers that smell like life and hope and remembrance. She touches the seat her father once sat on, traces the chrome he once polished, whispers words meant only for him. Thank you for being brave enough to leave them for me. Thank you for loving me enough to give up the road. Thank you for giving me a family that found me when I needed them most. The president stands beside her every time. His hand on her shoulder. That key still hanging around his neck where it's lived for years now. Where it will live until the day he dies. A promise kept. A legacy honored. A brother never forgotten. Savannah's story spread beyond the Arizona chapter, beyond the Iron Brotherhood, beyond the motorcycle community entirely. It became the kind of story people tell when they want to believe in goodness, when they need to remember that family isn't always about blood. When they need proof that strangers can become saviors, and that walking toward hope, even when you're scared, even when you're small, even when you're alone, can change everything. News outlets tried to cover it, wanted to film the memorial ride, wanted to interview Savannah and her mother and the president. They declined every time. This wasn't a story for cameras and ratings and viral fame. This was sacred. This was private. This was family, and family doesn't perform for audiences. But the people who were there, the neighbors who saw 280 bikers roll down their quiet street. The hospital staff who watched leather-clad giants keep vigil in their waiting room. The school teachers who noticed how Savannah was never dropped off by the same person twice, but always by someone who clearly loved her. They knew. They understood. They witnessed something pure and true and rare. A little girl who once walked alone now had a family that would never let her fall. Not when she struggled with homework. Not when she faced bullies at school. Not when her mother had health scares that turned out to be nothing but triggered old fears. Not when she got her heart broken for the first time. Not when she graduated high school to thunderous applause from 280 bikers in the audience. Not ever. Because that's what it means when the Iron Brotherhood calls you family. It means forever. It means protection. It means showing up. It means that a promise made in grief and shock and sudden recognition of responsibility becomes as permanent as the ink in their tattoos, as solid as the steel in their motorcycles, as unbreakable as the bonds they forge on the open road. Savannah's father gave up everything to be a father. And in doing so, he gave his daughter something more valuable than he could have ever known. He gave her a second family, a backup plan written in chrome and leather. And the fierce loyalty of men who understand that brotherhood doesn't end with death. It transforms. It adapts. It finds new forms. And sometimes it looks like 280 Harleys rolling down an Arizona street to save a little girl who dared to walk toward hope when she had nothing left but a key and a prayer. If you believe people should be protected when they're vulnerable, if you stand with those who show up when others would turn away, if you think family is about who shows up rather than who shares your name, then share this story. Let people know that kindness still exists, that brotherhood still matters, that a little girl's desperate walk can still end in salvation. Comment family never falls alone, if this moved you. Because in the heart of Arizona, in a clubhouse where a restored Harley sits gleaming under spotlights, that's not just a saying. It's a way of life. It's a promise. It's the truth that Savannah learned when strangers became saviors and a 4-mile walk became the first step toward forever.